You're listening to Between the Lines, a podcast about the rituals of reading and storytelling. In this episode, I will be taking a stroll down memory lane with two people who I consider to have had a major impact on my views towards reading and literacy. Our professor has recently asked us to do an assignment entitled My Personal Literacy Story. Naturally, I started with a survey of the earliest forms of literacy I could remember, such as watching Sesame Street as a kid or reading Golden Books with my mother. To me, this one was unsatisfying. I knew that my personal literacy story was not just about what I read, but more about why I read. So, one snowy January afternoon, I decided to drive to my grandmother's house in downtown Hamilton.
This is a good book. I read it years and years ago.
The Inheritors by William Golding.
It's fantastic. This is how the human race came about.
Every time I have visited my granny since the time I was 8 years old, she has given me books that she thinks I will like. This visit was no different. One of the first books I remember her giving me, The Call of the Wild by Jack London.
So we carried a little gas mask.
You
box.
carried a gas mask box to school every morning?
Every child did.
No way.
England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, we all had to take gas masks because we were frightened to get being gassed.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you went to this countryside school, you said you learned how to read there.
Yes, read.
So since I'm listing my grandmother as one of my major literacy mentors, I felt that it was necessary to go into her background a little bit, try and understand why she learned to read and how she learned to read. I could only imagine that our worlds were entirely different. So is there anybody who, like you kind of looked up to about reading or talked about books a lot with you when you were younger?
The only one that I ever remembered reading books to her, she read the whole book, she would do a part every day, was Miss... I loved her. I loved her because she read, because I would sit there and just listen to her tell the story. Miss Duncan.
Now this is what I find interesting. Here's a woman who's 80 years old, and she doesn't recall what she read in school, but she recalls her teacher's name. Maybe I'm grasping at straws here, but what I find really interesting is after all these years, she doesn't really remember the books or the stories she read, but she remembers who read them to her. It's like she's saying that books are important, yes, but the people who teach you to read are even more important. Hi, Randy. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. How are you?
The voice you're hearing is my Uncle Randy. I had to call him in Vancouver because he's one of the only males in my family who also shares a passion for reading. So much so that 25 years ago, when he threw out his back working at IKEA, he decided to go back to school. Now, he teaches English and journalism and is the library teacher at Vancouver College.
I don't have time to read my own stuff anymore because I have to read their stuff to do that, which is good. And there's some really, it's some fun stuff. It's teen fiction, though,
right.
But they love it. They absolutely love it. And the point is to get them excited and motivated to read, because my thinking is this: it doesn't matter the level that it is, but if they learn to, because it was the same trip that I went on, the same journey I went on, was you get inspired to read, novels and that, and then it starts to cross over into nonfiction, and then they just start to learn to love reading, and to get information from there. And which isn't to put down fiction by any means, because you can learn a lot about human nature, and on through fiction. You can I find often fiction is more telling than actual nonfiction, depending on who's writing it. But as I say, I'm pretty much stuck on teen fiction these days.
I think the single most imperative quote from my literacy class was from Reutzel. It states that the most expensive burden we place on society is those students who we have failed to teach to read well. I decided to share this quote with Randy because I thought it was something he could identify with.
I think what it does is, there's a couple points. I do agree with it. I would suggest that it's people who simply feel that they're not part of the mainstream because they're not intellectually connected. I don't mean in an academic sense, but just in a regular sense of having a general sense of what's going on in the world. And I think that if they feel that they're ostracized and set off to the side, that they'll start to believe it and just go, yeah, I'm not that smart. They could be really smart. They just, just never went down any path of academia, but never even setting academia aside, just a general sense of being a contributing person in society. And if you feel that you don't live up to that, you probably won't be a contributing person to society, and then you can get into all kinds of troubles. There's also
and you think reading is definitely connected with being a contributing member to society.
I do think so, and I mean, even if you're reading mainstream media stuff, at least you have a sense of what's going on in the world, and that you feel that you can, just generally hold your head up in a social setting and have comments on what's going on.
Randy mentions this idea of using books to question society a lot throughout his interview, how reading empowered him and his friends by allowing them to gain a sense of what is going on in the world. In the Reutzel and Cooter article I mentioned earlier, they talk about how reading is a gateway to social justice. On another level, reading was just a way for my grandmother to connect with characters like Cinderella. As for my personal literacy story, it wasn't just one thing for certain. Sure, it started out as a pastime, but it eventually grew into something more. It turned into a method to learn about other cultures and art forms outside of my little bubble. That's actually good because, Randy, this is an excellent segue into my next question. It's like you're reading my mind, or you're reading my questions. I don't know how you're doing. Well, the reason why I'm interviewing you in particular is because when we were asked to do the assignment, I started thinking about people who inspired my love of books and literacy, and someone who really affected me at a young age. And you were definitely one of the first people that came to mind. So I guess in a way you can say you really changed the path of my life.
That is very cool.
Yeah.
That is very interesting. And given how far away we live.
Yeah, but every time I remember us reconnecting, a lot of our conversations kind of revolved around books and about reading. And I just always thought, oh, my uncle's so cool. He's so different, and he's so interesting and eloquent, and I enjoy talking to him. And I remember one time in particular, and tell me if you remember this, I went to visit you and Inta and the family when you were living in the Malahat, I believe it was.
Yes, you got it. Yeah.
Okay, and I remember you had a little library in that house that you guys lived in, and I remember you showing me 2 books. I was about 8 years old, but I can still remember the 2 books you showed me, and they were way above my level, but I remember you showing them to me, and I was just like in awe of all these books that were surrounding this little library that you had set up. I mean, to me at the time it was big because I was only 8, right?
Yeah.
But
sure.
Can you remember the 2 books you showed me?
I'm trying to think of one. I'm actually looking at a bookshelf in my living room. I have 2 big bookshelves.
Okay, I'll give you the genres. I'll give you a hint. Okay, one of them was a biography.
I didn't already mention it today.
Nope.
Okay.
Famous 19th century.
Politician?
No, it's actually based on a famous medical case.
It wasn't The Elephant Man?
It was. Good.
Was
nice.
The Elephant Man?
It was. Yeah. I still remember the front cover of that book. It was it was like, I believe it was red, and it had a black outline or silhouette of a man with a giant head.
The Elephant Man, I've got it right here. Holy man, you really nailed that. Okay, so it's orange kind of border, and then it's got a big, huge orange circle, which would be his head. and it's like a stickman drawing.
Yeah, like a bathroom icon of a male, right? That's what I remember. Yeah,
exactly. and the background is black.
Yeah. Okay. I
cannot believe you remembered that, man. You nailed it. Okay, I'm looking at it right now.
The second book that you recommended was a history book, and it was so cool. Black and white photos, beautiful book. It was big hardcover.
On World War II?
No. Canadian history.
Canadian history. On the railway?
Yeah, The Last Spike.
The Last Spike. You know what? I'm going to teach that next week, actually.
Nice.
I teach a 3-week segment on the building of the railway. Pierre Burton, The Last Spike.
That's cool. And I have to admit, Randy, both of those books I haven't read yet. So that'll be my homework. That'll be my homework.
What I think is cool is that you just like the idea about the books.
Yeah. Totally. And I think that was it. It was just being exposed to them by my really cool uncle who lived on the mountain and read a lot. So one thing that we all have in common are connections to people and reading. Connections to fictional people that briefly occupy a space in our minds while we read a good story, and the very real ones who we have the opportunity to share those stories with. As Reutzel and Cooter point out, it is after all people we learn to read from, teachers being the most important. This idea that reading is connected to people will definitely guide my choices for activities in the classroom. As a teacher, I will remember that students need to feel a sense of empowerment in their reading, and feel that they also can contribute to the classroom community by sharing their ideas. Hopefully, later, this will allow them to feel a sense of connectedness with their surrounding world and the ability to participate as a responsible citizen. For my own 4-year-old son, who is just learning to handle books, he has invented a whole new way of looking at reading. He calls this fake reading. Good job. You start on page 1. Good.
One day, Batman and Batgirl ride on a trip, and finally, Batgirl, her motorcycle got fast.
For me, as long as he can get into a good book, it's enough.
Say to Batman,
For now.
Right, but
Let's have a good what?
Ride. But we'll have a good motorcycle